I'm continuing my look at the games of Robert James Fischer, Bobby Fischer. And I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with this game, Fischer against Gardia. And many people have been informing me that Fischer's opponent, Olicio Gardia, was not Argentinian, but he was Brazilian. Indeed, he was twice Brazilian champion in 1959 and 1962. And a special thank you to Cesar Horta, who informed me that he played against Olicio Gardia in the 1962 Brazilian Championship, and Gardia beat him. In fact, looking up that game, Gardia beat him with the Breer Variation. There we go. That was really something very special to hear from Cesar Horta. Thank you very much. So, picking up on this game from last week. If you recall, Fischer played Rook A1, looking to crack open the A file, and that was enough to break black completely, overload. And I mentioned that I'd used this idea myself in several games, and I just want to show you a quick fragment from one of those games. This was played in the European Under-21 Championship in the Netherlands in 1982, some time ago. And well, I had the white pieces, and you can see I've already got this beautiful knight against the bad bishop. It's almost exactly the same pawn structure as Fischer had. Big difference here, of course, is that the queens aren't on the board. Now, I wouldn't say that I've got a strategically winning position here. Not yet. There's still a lot of hard work to go. I was considering playing moves like g3, king g2, maybe advancing on the king side, maybe g3, king g2, and f4 and king f3 is attractive. And possibly playing on the queen side as well, but more seeing what black was doing before I committed. But before I set things in motion on the king side, I thought I'd set a trap. I played b3. Now, this move is useful anyway because it prevents the rook coming to c4. And I was toying with the idea of possibly playing c4 and maybe advancing on the queen side. But to be honest, I was really thinking about playing on the king side. But my opponent believed me that I was looking to play c4, and he closed down that possibility with b5, and that was exactly what I was hoping for, because, well, I think you all know what's coming by now. Rook a1. Thank you to Bobby for that one. And black is completely lost after that move, because just as in Bobby's game, there's no real answer to a4 and breaking through with the rooks on the a file. In combination with the knight, black has no really good defense here. Let me just show you very quickly the next few moves. So I'm threatening just to take and play rook a5, rook a7. Black tried to hold things up by countering on the a file, but of course I don't need to exchange yet. First of all, I can just bring this rook back and then just double on the a file, and well, black can't prevent the breakthrough at all. So here we go, rook a2. So I'm threatening just to double on the a file. And okay, I've just got to watch out for a moment for this capture. So b4, no problem. The knight holds all these important squares, so there's no counterplay at all. Bishop d8, and now I simply exchanged on b5 and played rook a1. So black has to exchange, and now I've won control of the a file, and there's no decent defense to the invasion of the rook here or a7. In combination with the knight, it's just over. So these were the next few moves, and now rook here, and of course the bishop can't even go back here because of checkmate. I mean, that's the power of the knight. So my opponent played here, and I took a pawn, and well, it was very easy after that. So there we go. It pays to study the classics. And I want to pick up on this idea of playing a4 against b5. And this is a very, very common idea in the Spanish. And of course, Fischer was just an absolute master of the Spanish with the white pieces. So I'd like to look at one of those games. And this is from this bizarre match in 1992, the Fischer-Spassky rematch, 20 years after the Reykjavik match. Fischer and Spassky played again in Yugoslavia, which was at that time, breaking into civil war. I mean, this match was very odd for all kinds of reasons. That, not least that one, but of course because Fischer hadn't played any serious chess for 20 years, and Spassky was, well, past his best in 92. But anyway, I'd like to look at this first game from this match because I think it was a real masterpiece from Fischer. So, mainline Spanish. This was Fischer's favourite. And Spassky, of course, a great expert, not only on the black side of this, but the white side as well. And Fischer had played the Yates variation with d4, actually my favourite variation. He had played that previously, but he preferred to play the absolute main line with h3, preventing bishop g4 before you play d4. Now there are many ways for black to play this. You can play the old main line with knight a5 and c5, but Spassky preferred generally to play the Breer variation with knight b8. Now this looks very odd to retreat the knight. Actually, it strategically makes a lot of sense. The knight regroups to d7, where it still covers e5, but protects the knight on f6 as well, but also allows the bishop to come to b7, attacking white's pawn on e4. So white can't spin that knight round to g3 because the e-pawn is under fire. So first of all, white has to retreat the bishop. So the bishop has to move off this very menacing diagonal in order to protect the e-pawn, and only then will the knight continue its journey to this standard square g3. I like black's piece setup very much, probably because it reminds me of the Najdorf variation actually, and sometimes you can actually get a pawn structure is very similar to the Najdorf after say d5 and then c6, and after that exchange it's with this backward d-pawn, it's very much like a Najdorf. Anyhow, let's continue. Rook e8. So this is all very standard moves. So the rook just applies a little bit more pressure down the e-file. In the Reykjavik match in 72, Fischer actually played b4 here, but on this day he spun the knight round with knight f1, and this is the absolute main line of the Breer. So the bishop just drops to f8, so it means the rook can apply pressure on the e-pawn. The knight has made it round to g3, and black takes away the f5 square, and that also gives the bishop room on g7. Bishop g5, that's the standard move here. Well, white would very much like to play queen d2 to take control of this diagonal, and later on you might be able to play bishop h6 and get some kind of initiative on the king side. So black prevents that with h6, and the bishop drops to d2. It might be that later on it could be useful for white to attack that pawn on h6. So that was the point of playing bishop g5. Bishop g7, so black's king looks pretty snug now after that little regrouping. And, well, my database shows that Spassky actually, as white, had played rook c1 in this position. But Fischer played the standard move a4, absolutely normal in the Spanish. You try to take advantage of the fact that this pawn has had to advance to b5. it gives you a little something to nibble on here, and you might be able to later on use the A file with a bit of luck. So you can see the slight similarity between the Fischer game and this very standard Spanish position. Now, many moves possible for black, but Spassky played in the absolutely typical way, c5, and this is the other point behind dropping this knight away from c6 to free the c-pawn so black can gain space on the queen side. And now there's a bit too much pressure on the centre, so white closes this with d5. Very usual for the Spanish, closing off the bishop on b7, and white has a nice space advantage. But after c4, well, black is hitting back on the queen side and would like to play knight c5. And well, looking at my database, I've got well over 50 games of top-level chess played from exactly this position. This is really the main line of the Breer. I can see on my database that Magnus Carlsen has actually played this position with black last year in a blitz game, and he has played the Breer himself on several occasions. Here, Fischer played b4. Don't need to play b4, but it seems very logical to take away the knight square. And Spassky declined to take en passant, but, well, most games nowadays feature the exchange, allowing the knight to come to c5. But, well, I mean, this is still a strategically very rich position, but generally this has been accepted as the way for black to play. But Spassky plays in another way, knight h7. So he's looking to gain counterplay on the king side. So this keeps the position quite closed and very, very complex, actually. Because, both sides have to look at the king side and the queen side here. And it's sometimes very hard to evaluate what's going on here. Bishop e3 from Fischer. So the bishop claims this nice diagonal. h5 from Spassky, so we can now see that he's beginning to start counterplay on the king side. Queen d2 and rook f8, so this rook comes back, and you can see that perhaps he's looking to support an f5 pawn push. And now, how does white play this? Well, Fischer started to look at the queen side and started with the rook a3. So here we go. This hopefully looks familiar to you by now. Looking to double on the a file before exchanging pawns. If you exchange pawns, then of course it's difficult for white to increase the pressure on the a file. But this is why we keep the tension. And this is a very important moment in the game. Spassky held the position for the moment. He could have tried to break on the king side with h4, and Fischer would have had to weigh up the consequences of h4 and f5 very carefully before he played a move like rook a3. Reminds me very much of the King's Indian. So white has to have a good answer to this. But there is a good answer, and if you don't mind, I'm going to just take you through a possible way of meeting this, because I think it's, very instructive actually, how to deal with this f5 move. You can see that this bishop, this Spanish bishop, that is lurking in the background, but so often plays such an important role in the game. So first of all, knight g5. So looking to play knight e6. So that's why this knight has to be exchanged. Bishop hits the queen, looks at the h-pawn, so black has to play bishop f6. Okay, we won't trade immediately, we'll play bishop h6, looking at the rook, and don't forget, this is now en prise, so bishop g7. White trades. Now there are several ways to play this position. You could play f4 and block these pawns, but I really like this move knight e3, looking at the f pawn. So if this is pushed, then the knight comes in, knight f5 check, so queen g5. And now white can use the other side of the board. And this shows how important it is for white to, well, you can use your space advantage to switch back and forth. So you trade. Now rook takes not possible because the f pawn is on, so bishop takes. But now we take on f5, breaking up those pawns. And we switch to the a file. The queen has to stick here, otherwise this queen comes in. Bishop is hit. Knight across, and now rook here wins material. And white should win that position. So I think I just really like that variation because it's just such a good illustration of how white switches between two sides when you have a space advantage. Anyhow, instead of that, Spassky played knight f6. So he's perhaps looking to break in a different way later on, maybe sacrificing here or here. Fischer continued his build-up on the a file. And now, well, there could be a threat to exchange and play the rook down to a7 after an exchange on a8. So queen d7. And now Fischer triples on the a file. Queen a1. I mean, this is absolutely beautiful. So a threat here, and that's why Spassky brought the rook over, and he's now covers the rook on a8. Okay, and it's here. I can see I'm way over my time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the game here. I'm going to pause the video. And perhaps you'd like to have a think. How can white increase the pressure in this position? So over to you. If you know it, then please don't bother writing in if you know the game. But just have a think. How would you play here with white? How did Fischer play in this game? And I'll show you the rest of this really spectacular game next week.